In today's macro photography tutorial, I've got a very fun and simple little photography shoot that you guys can try out at home for some interesting and pretty unique results. Stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another macro photography tutorial where today we're doing something a little bit different and a little bit abstract. We're photographing rings using long exposures. Now that sounds a little bit strange, but if you take a look at some of these images that we're creating today, you'll see that we're spinning the ring on a table and using a long exposure to create these ethereal orbs using a ring. Now, you can use any fairly simple ring that you might have. I would recommend doing it with something a little bit sentimental, perhaps a wedding ring, and that leaves you with an image that, of course, you know is a sentimental ring, but others will be left wondering whether or not it's even a ring in the first place. It might take them a moment to figure out exactly what you've done there, but it's a really nice sentimental image that you can say, here's a photo of my wedding ring, and it's completely different to what people would expect from a wedding ring photograph. Now, I think most of you will have figured out the method already, but I am going to run through things step by step so that you can try and recreate this spinning orb ring photo yourself at home. So you are going to need a few different things for a shoot like this. The first one being, of course, a camera. Now, the choice of camera really doesn't matter too much, except that you will definitely need a camera that can have manual exposure settings, particularly your shutter speed. To get a long exposure like this, you need to be able to change your shutter speed. So a mirrorless or DSLR camera is preferred, but most phones and point and shoot cameras these days can be changed so that you have a long exposure. I'm shooting on the Sony a7 III here, and on the front of this I've got attached a macro lens. This is a 100mm f2.8 Tokina macro lens. Now, a macro lens again is not essential, you just need to be able to get close enough to your subject so that your ring will fill the frame. You can test this easily by placing a ring down on the table here and looking back through the camera to see how much space you have around your ring. It might be that if you don't have a macro lens, there's quite a lot of space, but if you have a macro lens, you're going to be able to frame your ring a little bit closer. Now, this comes with benefits and downsides, so we'll talk about those in a little while, but suffice to say that you just need a lens that will frame your ring nicely in the center of the shot. Now, you're also going to need a tripod. Long exposures by their very nature are prone to camera shake and a bit of wobble. Again, we're going to be contending with that as we go along, but for the very basics, you will need your camera set here on a tripod so that when you spin your ring, you can come to your camera and take your shot without having to reframe and refocus your shot. The last things that we're going to need is a backdrop, i.e. our bit of black card just here, and some lighting in the form of the Adaptalux Studio. So we're going to be lighting our ring with some nice coloured lighting arms, and that's going to give us some nice effects as the ring spins. Again, this is optional. You don't particularly need this particular light source, but it does help to have versatile, flexible lighting like this, so that you can place your lighting onto your small subject. This is the Adaptalux Studio. It is designed specifically for macro photography and interesting shoots just like this one. So if you have a macro photography setup like this, then you are all set to go. So I wear several different rings most of the time, and I'm going to be trying out with all of them because I think that they're all going to have different results. All of mine are silver and fairly plain, as in they don't have any stones or protrusions sticking out of them, but they are all slightly different shapes, and I think some of them are going to be easier to spin than others. So I'll report on which kinds of ring are the easiest to control as I'm going through. First of all, I'm going to start with my wedding ring, which has an interesting but fairly random surface. I think it's going to be fairly hard to keep in one place, but we'll find out as I start spinning it. So placing my ring down in the middle of my shot here, the first thing that you'll see is that we've got a sort of grayish looking background, and that's because we've not got any lighting in here yet, and we're aiming for a black or very, very dark background at least. But this is because I've not set any of my exposure settings yet. The second thing that you'll probably notice is that depth of field. We have a very, very shallow depth of field on the ring. I can really only get the front or perhaps the back in focus at once, certainly not both. So when this thing starts spinning around, it's going to be quite chaotic, and we need a good margin for error of where our exact focus is going to be on this ring. For that reason, I'm going to be shooting on a really small aperture. Currently I'm on f2.8, but you'll see that if I start moving up in apertures, we're getting to f22 here, or even 32, and things are completely dark. Now you might think that that's no good, but actually that's what we're aiming for. We want everything to be as dark as possible, because not only are we adding some lighting in here, we're also doing a long exposure. So I'm currently shooting at ISO 500, 1/50th of a second, and f32. Now this is leaving everything really dark, but we actually need to extend that shutter speed even longer, because when this starts spinning, I want to capture a lot of that movement. The exact shutter speed that you use is up to you, and it will create different effects, but this is a good starting point. Now it's time for some lighting. So I'm going to introduce the Adaptalux Studio on a little mini tripod here, and I'm going to place this just off to the side of where my ring is, and then introduce some lighting arms. So we have these flexible lighting arms that can be placed in all sorts of interesting positions, but today we're simply going to be plugging in one on one side and another on the other side. So we'll bring a red lighting arm in this side and perhaps a blue lighting arm on the other side. So placing those down so they're both pointing at the two different sides of the ring, you'll notice that there's some little highlights now showing up on the reflective surface of the metal. We're going to get red on the outside over here and red on the inside over here, but then conversely blue on the outside of the ring and then blue on the inside of the ring. So two different lights, two different colors coming from two different directions is sure to create some interesting light trails as the reflective object spins. Now, of course, my settings are still leaving this looking really quite dark. We're still at 1/50th of a second ISO 500 and f32. But if I start lowering the shutter speed on my camera, you'll notice that everything starts to get a lot brighter. So we're now at 1/5 of a second. You'll notice that as I move my hand around in here, we get a lot of blur, and the shutter speed all of a sudden doesn't match up with the frame rate, so it looks a little bit strange, but this is just for demonstration. Now, if I take my ring and do a little spin, you'll see that effect start to appear. Now, we are aiming for stills rather than video, but this should give you a good idea of what your shot might look like as you take your stills. Now, depending on how you want your shot to turn out, you might take the opportunity at this point to experiment with different shutter speeds. If I lower my shutter speed even further and perhaps bring down my ISO to compensate, we'll see that we're going to end up with a different type of shot again. As you watch that ring spin around, I'm sure you're thinking the same as me, in that it doesn't stay in the center of the frame. It's really hard to predict where a spinning object like this is going to fly off to, where it's going to settle, and there is certainly going to be a little bit of variance in how you take your shot because of that variance in the ring and the positioning. Perhaps there's a slight slant on your table, or there's a slight breeze. It can all affect where your ring is going to go off to when you start spinning it. So you want to try and eliminate as many variables as possible and keep your ring as central as possible. I think what I'm going to do is set up my bit of black card in a bit of a curve, so that if it tries to go off to the side, you'll be encouraged to go back down to the center. I don't think there's anything that I can do about the forward back movement, but at least if there's a bit of a curve, it should center itself right where I need it to be, at least in terms of left to right movement. Now, if you've got any clever solutions suggestions to this, I'd like to hear them down in the comments. Perhaps some sort of bowl would keep everything down in the center, or at least eventually center itself, but it might also make things a little bit worse with it rocking from side to side in all different directions. So let me know down in the comments if you have a clever idea to keep these spinning rings in position. But for now, I'm going to be chancing it, and I actually think that's a little bit part of the fun when you're shooting something like this, trying over and over again and eventually getting that shot that you've been looking for. The other variable that is really important here is your shutter speed, and it does depend on the style of your ring spin as well. If you do a really fast spin, then you want a faster shutter speed as well. If your ring is spinning quite slowly, then a slower shutter speed might work. I've been shooting anywhere between 1/5 of a second and 1/15 of a second. A faster shutter speed like 1/15 is going to leave your ring looking more recognizable as a spinning ring. However, if you're wanting some more abstract looking shots, then a slower shutter speed like 1/5 is going to obscure the fact that you're looking at a ring a little bit more, and you'll have more of those light trails but less of a recognizable spinning ring image. There is one other factor that affects the outcome of your image and what it looks like, and that is the diffusion of the light. So far, I've been shooting with these lights completely undiffused, and that gives me really harsh highlights on the reflective surfaces of the ring. They manifest as very sharp lines as the ring rotates. However, if I were to attach some diffusion onto these lighting arms, then all of a sudden the light source is much, much bigger, and therefore the reflection in the ring is much, much bigger as well. So as the ring spins, you'll end up with much more blurred colors coming out of the ring, and potentially a much more abstract looking shot. It's something to consider, but I think I'm going to be sticking with undiffused direct light sources that are really small to create those tiny little highlights and really pinpoint the movement of the ring. I've got one more tip for you guys with a shoot like this, and that is don't give up. It seems really frustrating when you're spinning your ring and it goes off in some random direction, or just collapses onto the floor, or doesn't quite stay still enough to get the shot. However, eventually, after enough trial and error, spinning the ring will leave the ring sat in the perfect spot that you want it to, and you can get your shot, and it's a lot more rewarding after all of that trial and error. So I do recommend giving this one a go with an open mind and a little bit of patience, because it can be a little bit frustrating. However, if you want to get that random looking shot and that amazement value of spinning a ring and creating those light trails, and potentially the sentimental value of doing it with something that's quite precious to you, then it's certainly worth the time and effort. I'd like to know what you guys think to my fun and potentially a little frustrating shoot that you guys can do at home. Let me know down in the comments, and make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed the shoot and my results today. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas, and inspiration coming in the future. But for now, that is all I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.